So hello and welcome to everyone joining us live. If you're also watching the recorded on-demand version of this webinar, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Reece and I'm an academic within the University of Sydney, and I've also been a member of the Global Research Board for Parkrun for a number of years now. I'm absolutely delighted to be your chair for today's event, entitled The Struggle Behind the Success. As we gather here physically dispersed and socially constructed, I would just like to take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so recognise the various traditional lands on which we are all joining us from today. For me here in Sydney, I'd like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging of all the land we work and live, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. So back in 2020, the Global Research Board took the decision to commence an open invite public seminar series in order for us to share latest Parkrun news and Parkrun related research to a much wider community. This series is delivered by the Parkrun Research Board, which is hosted by the Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre at Sheffield Hallam Uni in the UK. It's our privilege today to bring you the first international webinar as part of this series from Australia. For years, Parkrun has strived to be the leading global exemplar of delivering community-wide opportunities to be active and enable more people around the world to connect through movement in an inclusive, friendly way. For years, we've celebrated these success stories, for which there have been loads. But also, if we take time to truly listen and reflect to what the data we get in every week from every global event around the world, we can see that many people are motivated to register, yet don't quite take the first step to participate at an event. Or if they do, they don't always return. So in collaboration with Parkrun and our research community, today we're going to discuss our latest research where we reached out to the Parkrun community to understand what some of these barriers were. What were the barriers for taking that first step to attend that event? Before I introduce today's speakers, I'm just going to do a couple of quick housekeeping just to make sure the event runs smoothly and it's enjoyable for everyone. You'll notice that everyone's muted by default. This just helps avoid any disruptions. Each speaker has promised they will stick to their time, and there's 3 speakers, and this will enable us to have plenty of time for questions at the end of the 3 presentations. Therefore, I encourage you before, during and after the presentations to drop your questions into the Q&A function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. Any problems with that, just let us know in the chat function, but please do keep those questions coming. If you wish to join the conversation on any of our social channels, please use the hashtag Parkrun, and I'll ensure I also put the panel members' handles in the chat for you to tag them in if you wish. Today's seminar is being recorded and you can access this on demand on the AWRC YouTube channel in the next week or so. Okay, so without further delay, it is absolutely my privilege to introduce my dear friend and colleague from Parkrun Australia, Mr. Glen Turner, to share his slides and kick off this exciting webinar. Over to you, Glen.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks everybody for tuning in. It's no secret that we've tried to make this the most controversial and exciting event that we've had down here since the Australian Open tennis last month. But before we do that, I thought it might be helpful just to quickly provide a brief overview of where Australia is in its Parkrun journey. So Parkrun in Australia turns 11 this year. Of the 23 Parkrun countries, we're the next largest behind the UK in terms of events and participants. We've got 435 5K events every Saturday morning. More than 750,000 different people have taken part. And we've also had 120,000 individuals who volunteered. Up until COVID, 10% of Parkrun Australia finishers were walkers. We had more women and girls taking part than males, which included in core volunteer teams. And like most Parkrun countries, the average finishing time at our events was getting slower each year. We also have some of the most remote parkruns on Earth. For example, if you do Weeper Parkrun up in Cape York or Kununurra Parkrun in the Kimberley, or Kalgoorlie Parkrun in Western Australia, if your home parkrun is cancelled 1 week, the next nearest event is a leisurely 1,600 kilometres or 1,000 mile round trip, which is an early start to the day by anybody's definition. Now, in this enormous landmass, we've got about 23 million people who are old enough to register for Parkrun. And of those 23 million people, 1.1 million people have registered with Parkrun, which means we're almost at the stage where 1 in 20 Australians have signed up. However, of those 1.1 million, 350,000 have never actually walked or run or volunteered. In other words, a third of Parkrun barcodes in Australia have never been used. Now, the good news is that we have what must be the largest focus group in Australia when it comes to understanding what stands between people making that first conscious decision towards behaviour change and actually taking that literal first step out of their house or even out of their car in the car park at Parkrun. Furthermore, while these people may be reluctant to come to Parkrun, thankfully they're not near as reluctant to respond to our surveys, which is great from the perspective that what we want to do is understand why so many people feel hesitant about coming to Parkrun, so that we can develop strategies to encourage and retain them. And as Kat will mention in her piece shortly, the barriers people face are complex, they are gendered, and they are also very dynamic. For example, we need to acknowledge that the world's been navigating a global pandemic for the past 2 years, and with that comes its own challenges that disproportionately impact those who are the most vulnerable. What we're seeing at Parkrun is essentially a microcosm of what's happened across most communities globally. Those who we've worked the hardest to attract to our events and those who've got the most to gain from our events are the most reluctant to come back. And primarily this means women and girls, people in deprived communities, and those who live with disabilities and long-term health conditions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, up until the beginning of the pandemic, Australian parkruns had more women and girls taking part in our events than males, and they took part more often. Yet since our events have reopened, that balance has flipped. We've now got more males more often. Now, the good news with all of this is that we've got this very large, very informative, very captive audience who we can tap into to help us see Parkrun through their eyes. And that's helping us to develop interventions and initiatives to make Parkrun more accessible and more appealing. For example, we've introduced a first timers welcome to meet and greet new parkrunners. It's not operational, it's not health and safety. It's rather, hey, how you going? Welcome to Parkrun. Have you got any questions? We've developed a bespoke email journey for new Parkrun Australia registrants. We've recently released a volunteer video series of 8 short social media films, and they showcase how people can dip their toe into Parkrun for the first time through volunteering. And every International Women's Day in March, we have an annual Parkrun campaign. And the last time round, in a single day, we saw an uplift globally of 10,000 women and girls on a single day taking part in our events. And of course, it's just a start, but we are moving in the right direction because it's all well and good having 1.1 million people registered with Parkrun in Australia, but the real impact isn't measured in numbers. It's measured by how we create a pathway for those people who are the least likely to get involved in our events, but who've got the most to benefit. And to help us do that, we're addressing a significant part of the challenge through the data and the insight that we've collected about these groups. And I'll hand over to Kat to talk a little bit more about that research. Thanks very much.
Cool. Thanks, Glenn. So this research that I'm about to be talking about, it was a collaboration between the University of Sydney Sprinter Research Group and the Parkrun team as well. And like Glenn mentioned, we aim to, first of all, determine who are the people who register for Parkrun and either never participate or they participate in one event but don't continue participating. And then the second thing we looked to do was understand the barriers that these people face to continuing their participation in Parkrun. We conducted a cross-sectional quasi-experimental study, and there was an online survey which was co-developed by Parkrun staff members and the Parkrun Research Board, and it was distributed across 3 countries, Australia, Ireland, and the UK. The survey was sent to people who were aged over 16 years who registered for a parkrun and had either not yet participated or had only participated in one event and not returned in the 2-year period we were looking at. And so we were looking at 2017 and 2019, so before the COVID period. The first thing we did was we calculated some sample weights to make sure our survey sample was representative of the entire population who registered and didn't attend or attended one event. And then we looked at some descriptive stats, and then we also did some logistic regression to determine which demographic characteristics were associated with each barrier that people faced. And like Glenn mentioned, of the 680,000 people who registered in this time period, almost 300,000 people never attended a single event, which is 43% of people who registered. And we had an additional 23% of people, so almost 150,000 people who registered and only attended one event in the time period and didn't return for some reason. And from here, we thought, who are these people? Who are the people who are registering and are coming to one event or not coming to any events? And I guess, why is that? And we found that there was 3 particular groups of people that were more likely to register and not attend or only attend one event. The first group were young people, so 16 to 24 years. There were almost 300,000 young people who registered, and 139,000 of those did not attend a single event, which is around 47%. And then there was another 23% of young people, so 67,000 who attended once and then didn't come back. The second group we found that were more likely to register and not attend were females. So we had 170,000 females register for Parkrun, but not attend a single event in the time period. So it was around 45% of females. And then there was another 82,000 females who registered and attended one event, but didn't come back, which is around another 22%. And the third group that we found that were more likely to register and not actually attend a Parkrun event were those who were classified as inactive. And we classified people as inactive if they were active or physically active less than 1 time per week. And crazy, over 50% of people who are inactive registered and didn't attend a single event, which is around 37,000 people. And then there are another 13,000 or 19% of inactive people who came once but didn't come back in that period. And from here, we asked ourselves the question, what are the barriers to participating in Parkrun for these people? Why aren't they coming back? Or why are they registering and not coming to a single event? These were the top 5 barriers that we found. The first one being start time being inconvenient. People were saying that they feel too unfit. People were reporting injury and illnesses, not having enough time, and childcare obligations. The number 1 barrier for both groups was start time being inconvenient. So of people who attended no events, 20% reported that the start time was inconvenient. And for those who attended one event, 24% reported the start time being inconvenient. And you can see there feeling unfit was the second top barrier for people who didn't attend. Whereas for people who attended one event, the second top barrier was not having enough time. We then had a look at if there was any demographic differences in barriers, and we found that females were much more likely to report feeling unfit. So for females who did no events, they were 45% more likely to report feeling unfit compared to males who did no events. We also found that females who participated in one Parkrun event were 141% more likely to report feeling unfit compared to males who completed one event. And then we found for people who were inactive people who participated in no Parkrun events were 290% more likely to report feeling unfit compared to active people who participated in no events. And we also found for inactive people who participated in one event, they were 328% more likely to report feeling unfit compared to active people who participated in one event. And you can just see the odds ratios down the bottom there. And so from this data, we concluded that Parkrun does have population reach across the 3 countries, Australia, Ireland, and the UK. However, there still are inequalities in participation. There are groups who are registering but not actually coming to Parkrun. And these groups were particularly the young people, 16 to 34 years, females, and people who are inactive. And so we suggested that Parkrun could co-create strategies with people who experience these barriers, particularly the psychological barriers of feeling too unfit, in order to increase physical activity participation within Parkrun and across the population. And if you want to have a look at the paper in more detail, get the more detailed results, feel free to click this link and it'll take you to the full paper, which was done with Sydney Uni and Parkrun in collaboration. And so from here, I will hand over to Lorinda, who will put a lovely face to the data that I have presented here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. So as mentioned, my name's Lorinda Coulter. I'm a wife, a mum, and a primary school teacher, and I'd like to share a bit of my parkrun journey with you today. So I cried the first time I did parkrun. It was back in 2016, and I didn't want to be a parkrun, and I especially did not want to run. I'd never been a runner. I left that type of exercise to my other half. So my husband, Aaron, and our 2 boys, Landon and Xander, who were 12 and 10 at the time, had been going to parkrun for about a month or so, and the boys had been asking me to join them. So with mum guilt, I committed to 1 week, just one. I told them I would go to parkrun for 1 week. So the actual morning I woke up, and I swear I went to the toilet at least 5 times. I wasn't sure what to wear. I didn't want to wear something that looked like I was a runner, but I also didn't want to look unfit. Turning up at Ballarat Parkrun, I really didn't know what to expect. I thought there were going to be a whole lot of super fit athletes and I would be way behind, that the volunteers would have to wait like at least an extra half an hour for me to cross the line. I was nervous and anxious about what everyone was going to think about how bad I was. I was kind of hoping there wouldn't be anyone there that I knew to see my bad running skills, but on the other hand, I wanted to see a familiar face. Both my boys had said they would run with me, but at the last minute decided to run with their dad, so I was facing this alone. I couldn't believe the number of people who had voluntarily gotten up early on a Saturday morning to run when they could have stayed in bed. I ran and walked the whole course, feeling worse as more and more people passed me running. During the last kilometre, my husband came back to run with me. I remember the exact spot when I saw him coming and the tears that formed in my eyes. Don't ever ask me to do this again. It was the first thing I said. It was definitely not what I thought it was going to be, and I was definitely not coming back. The next week, I found myself standing at the start line again. At the time, Ballarat Parkrun put the names of people who had completed their first parkrun or gained a PB the week before into a hat and would draw some of them out to acknowledge them during their run brief. Aaron convinced me that I had to be there if they called my name out, and it wouldn't be as bad the second time. He also suggested I take my dog with me for company. I ended up finding myself at the start line again more than once. Each parkrun became easier and I was finding I could run a little bit further each time. I could feel myself improving not only in my running, but in my mental health as well. I was recognising the faces of other people who ran, walked around my pace. And even though the kids wanted to run with Aaron because I was too slow, I was starting to feel that I wasn't alone out there. After participating for a couple of months, I joined the volunteer crew for the first time and found that just as rewarding. Over time, I had to go at various roles and met even more people. I even made a group of friends who hooked me up with a local running group called River's Gift that helped raise money for Sid's research. The next time I cried at Parkrun was 2 years after I started running, except this time it was happy tears. After a couple of injuries and mental health battles, I finally ran 5 kilometres without stopping. Aaron and my younger son Xander ran with me the whole way, and I think it was my proudest moment in my running journey. It still brings tears to my eyes thinking about how I felt crossing that finishing line and the encouragement I got from others at the parkrun. In 2019, after running Ballarat Parkrun one morning, our home parkrun at the time, Aaron and I were chatting to a local event ambassador, Reece, about how there was a great place for another parkrun on the other side of Ballarat, closer to our home. Little did we know, he was looking for a place to start a second parkrun in Ballarat. So long story short, on the 28th of December 2019, Aaron and I launched Wallaby Track Parkrun together as co-event directors, with the help of event ambassador Bruce Purdy and a fantastic support crew of Wallabies, which is what we call volunteers at Wallaby Track, including our 3 kids. It was so exciting to be able to encourage others along their parkrun journey and see people achieving their own goals. So where am I now, nearly 6 years into my parkrun journey? Well, I've participated in a total of 144 parkruns and volunteered on 57 separate days. It was so exciting when parkrun finally returned after COVID, but I've only just been able to return to participating at parkrun in the last few weeks due to an ongoing injury. Although I've been able to get a lot of volunteer credits up in the last month or so, it has been great to be able to return to run walking, encouraged by a lot of our regular parkrunners at Wallaby Track who know a bit of my journey. Parkrun definitely is a really encouraging community. Our youngest child, Lucy, has also joined us at Parkrun, and all 3 of our kids, now 12, 15 and 17, have run over 50 parkruns each. With Xander, our 15-year-old, currently sitting on 98. Lucy, our youngest, has also joined the 25 volunteer club and loves encouraging everyone at Parkrun. She was actually our run director, with the help of Aaron, at Wallaby Track's first ever Junior Wallaby Takeover Week. Due to my ongoing injuries, I still take over 40 minutes to walk, run, parkrun, but it's definitely changed my family's lifestyle for better, and I hope it never changes back. We even look for local parkruns to visit when we go on family holidays. Thanks, Parkrun, for showing me that I was capable of something I never thought I could do, and for giving me some great friends along the way. Thank you for listening to my story, or a bit of my parkrun journey so far. I'm now going to pass it back to our chair, Lindsay.
Thank you so much to all the presenters, and Lorinda, thank you so much for taking the time to share your honest story. I see some comments in the Q&A just reflecting on how I'm sure your story resonates with many people, that fear and the feelings of intimidation. I'm sure many people have felt that, and certainly the data shows it. So thank you for sharing your honest story and really putting that human element to the data research, which often as academics, we don't always take the time to do. So thank you so much, Lorinda. I'm going to invite Glen, Lorinda and Kat to just join us back with their video so you can see their faces as we now go to the juicy part of the session, which is basically a Q&A, and hopefully this is going to be a nice ongoing discussion. Where I'm going to start, so thank you also, Lisa, for sharing your comment about Lorinda's story. The first question I'm going to throw to actually Kat is around publishing the results. So we've had a question about, are the results available? Where can people go to access the results? Can I just ask you to share that link and provide a bit more information about the published paper, please, Kat?
Yep, sure. So it's published in BMC Public Health, and I can share the link in the chat now if that's helpful. And the paper's called Barriers to Initiating and Maintaining Participation in Parkrun. I'll share the link now as well.
Amazing, thanks, Kat. And just while I've got you talking, we've had a question around whether there was any qualitative comments captured within the survey. I just wondered if you could maybe expand on that a little bit more, just to give a flavour about the nature of the survey questions, what we asked, and maybe some of the qualitative comments.
Yeah, so that particular question in terms of barriers was a multiple choice. So there's not really any qualitative data in terms of that one. There was, people could respond to other if they had another reason. But unfortunately, we can't really delve deeper into start time, but maybe some qualitative interviews would be helpful in the future, so we could delve more into it to understand if it is too hot or if it's too early or too late or whatever that might be.
Thanks, Kat. And I know Parkrun routinely, through their marketing and communications channels, also reach out to the community to seek feedback. Glen, do you have any thoughts about the blogs and various other opportunities where you get insights from the Parkrun community?
Yes, I think the biggest asset we've always had with Parkrun is people, and Lorinda has just showcased that brilliantly. I think there was a comment in there about the name Parkrun and whether or not maybe it'd be better with a different name. But I think really it's about, for us as an organisation, just articulating the way that you can get involved in Parkrun. And that's expanded over the years. You know, we used to use participants and volunteers separate. And then now, obviously, participants is anybody who comes along and gets involved, for example. We talk a lot about supporters now and spectators, so people who come along and just see Parkrun for themselves the first time. I think the beauty is that when you go to any event, you can see somebody who looks like you or who you can relate to. And so, yeah, anything that we can do to let people know that Parkrun is a way that you can get involved however you like on a certain day. There's no judgment, there's no pressure, and everybody who's willing to put themselves out there, like Lorinda, and share their Parkrun stories. I think our audience is so big now that every time somebody shares their story, they will encourage somebody to come along to Parkrun. So every time somebody does share a story, it changes somebody else's life, which is, yeah, I think it's a real insight into human nature. And when in a previous life, when I used to work in the communications team for Parkrun, thousands of times, probably literally over 10 years, I would say to people, are you keen to share your story? And they say, well, nobody wants to hear my story. And I will say, well, it'll change somebody's life. And they'll say, okay, I'll do it then.
Yeah, certainly the power of storytelling just really cannot be oversold, can it? Thank you for that, Glenn. Lorinda, you're certainly getting a lot of love on the Q&A and the chat function. So I encourage you, if you're not talking, just have a look through the comments, because there really is a lot of recognition for your bravery and courage of sharing your story. So thank you once again. A limitation with this particular survey that we sent in some ways was that we only surveyed people who had registered and never attended, or registered and went once. We've had a question about, is there more data on dropout rates for Parkrun? So those people that dropped out 2 or 3 times. And Lorinda, in your story, you shared about how, you had to pluck up the courage to go for that second time to get on the start line. Kat, are you aware of any data around dropout rates longer term in Parkrun? And then potentially, Glenn, you might want to chip into Kat's answer if you can, please.
That's an interesting point. We definitely have the data. We could look at dropout and returning and dropout rates and how many times people return and all of that kind of thing. We have the data, but as far as I'm aware, I don't think we've actually looked at that specifically. Glenn?
No, we haven't, but something that we certainly can do and need to. I think it's a long line of things that we can investigate.
Certainly, we have a long list, don't we? We have another question for you, Kat. Oh, it's just disappeared. Okay, I'm going to switch it because it's just disappeared from my screen. Here we go. So thank you for sharing the research and results. I was wondering if there's any additional information on the survey question related to the barrier of start time. Yeah, this was an interesting one, wasn't it? We had inconvenient start time come up a couple of times. And again, Lorinda, you commented on how surprised you were by the number of people who voluntarily get up. And in Australia, it's even earlier. So in the UK, for example, it starts, around 8, 9 o'clock here. There's parkruns that start at 7 a.m. due to the heat. So Kat, is there anything around seasonality effects, or was there any expansion given around the start time that you can maybe allude to as a barrier, please?
Unfortunately, it was just a multiple choice item. Like I mentioned before, we can't really delve much more into it at the moment. Although it would be very interesting if we could see if it was too early or too late, or what people thought, why it was inconvenient. It's just hard to find a time that will suit everyone.
Lorinda, I'm gonna throw to you on this one. So you were surprised by how many people regularly get up early. You're now part of the club. Any advice for people who are struggling with the start time, perhaps, or the motivation to get up in the morning?
Oh, it's a really hard one for me. It was the mum guilt that got me there in the first place. But then it's just getting into the routine of stuff. So it's always that difficulty for that first time trying anything new. I think you're going to find barriers if you're feeling nervous about something. So some people, it might be the time. Other people, in Ballarat in particular, it might be how cold it is at that time in the morning. Could be all different things. But yeah, for me, we set a routine and we just have our alarm go off at the same time every Saturday morning now. So
amazing, good for you. It's a great way to start the weekend, isn't it? Kat, we've got one for you here. So, and this actually maybe draws on some of our other research that we've conducted with Parkrun. So did the study evaluate the size of the Parkrun attended? So would smaller Parkruns, for example, 50 finishers versus larger Parkruns, maybe in excess of 150, create a more welcoming or intimidating environment for a first timer? So a question there around the size of parkruns, and I know we've done a bit of work around size and location of parkruns that maybe you could just expand on, please.
So I guess in this particular study and in our other studies, we haven't really looked at the size of parkruns and seeing if that has any influence. What we did do, like you mentioned, was we looked at the current locations of parkruns, and we had a look at where people are kind of traveling from, and if we did want to increase participation, where would be the best place to locate some new parkruns, which would just increase participation and access for people specifically in disadvantaged areas who might not have access, like Glenn mentioned, might have to travel 160 kilometres just to get to their local parkrun. So that was something that we've been doing with Parkrun as well.
A question for you, Glenn, which maybe Lorinda you'd like to chip into afterwards as well. A question about, do you think there needs to be more marketing and communications through the Parkrun channels, that Parkrun you can actually walk, roll, skip, move in any way you wish to, other than running and jogging? Is there more marketing needed to make people aware of that fact? Glenn, can I invite you to discuss that first?
No discussion required. The answer is absolutely, absolutely, and it's the predominant focus, I think, of all of our communication and our community outreach and the interventions that we're involved in, is really imploring that Parkrun can be whatever you want it to be on any particular day, and we really do target people who are walking, especially in groups and with dogs, as Lorinda talked about earlier. And trying to permeate that through all of the messaging that we do. So even if it's a subliminal message that you can walk, you can volunteer, you can support and spectate. We even know there are people whose first parkrun experience is skipping the event entirely and going straight to the cafe because they need that social interaction each week. So I think for us, we've got, on the surface, this great offering in terms of our events, but the big challenge is articulating all the ways that people can get involved. And that what might suit you one week might not suit you the next.
Yeah, so a big thing for me when I first started was thinking that I had to be quick to finish it. So even if I was walking, I had to walk really fast. So even maybe promoting that there are some park runners who do take over an hour to complete 5 kilometres, and that's okay, that there's no judgment from the volunteers or anybody else at Parkrun that you do take over an hour. Everybody's just encouraging, no matter whether you're a 20-minute runner or you're an hour and 10-minute walker, you still get the same amount of encouragement.
Fantastic. We've had a couple of comments and questions around the psychological barriers, and people kind of intrigued by this. Obviously, females in the survey, we found that females are more likely to experience a psychological barrier. Can I just invite some comments from perhaps Kat, and then anyone who wants to chip in around kind of that psychological barrier, maybe how we can work to engage more women and girls in the longer term? I'm looking at you, Kat, but Glenn, you can jump in if you wish to.
My internet dropped out, sorry. Could you repeat the question?
So we were talking about the interest in the psychological barrier, and obviously women and girls are more likely to feel less likely psychologically to be able to attend. It was, I guess, a broad conversation around how we engage more women and girls and how we can support them to, increase their self-esteem to actually get them to the events. Just kind of comments on that, really.
That's exactly right. Women and girls, they do need to increase self-esteem. And I guess, like you were mentioning before, if they were to, I guess, understand that they don't need to run, they don't need to be fit, they could just go and walk and just socialize with their friends. If they had a better understanding of what to expect, that may help the barrier of feeling too unfit and the other psychological barriers of not having confidence to run and be wearing all these active wear and trying to do a fast time. They could just go and have a chat, walk with their friends, socialize. They may be more likely to attend and less likely to have the barrier of feeling too unfit or other psychological barriers.
Glenn, do you have any other thoughts on engaging women and girls more broadly? This is women and girls are a priority group that we experience across all of our physical activity and community interventions. But any thoughts about what Parkrun's doing to maybe focus on that kind of gender neutral environment?
Yes, we did a separate piece of research into this to inform a number of projects we were looking at. I can't say too much at this time. All I'll say is watch this space, because yes, it is very much, as you know, Lindsay, very much front and centre what we'll be doing a little bit later this year.
Indeed. That kind of brings us on to, really, for me, the key findings of this paper were once again highlighting the priority groups that we routinely hear in research, and those of us that are practitioners on the ground delivering, whether it's physical activity or social communications, it's always the priority participants. So people that are physically inactive, people that are coming from disadvantaged communities, our CALs, our Indigenous groups, our culturally and linguistically diverse groups, they are the ones that face more and more barriers to be active. This research, once again, through Parkrun, reinforces that. This opens up a broader discussion about how we really make sure that the environment is inclusive. What strategies, what research, what things can we do to really make sure that those priority populations are catered for? Glen, as you're unmuted, I'm going to throw to you first, and I'll ask Kat from a research perspective.
Yes, I think because the way that people can access Parkrun is so broad, I think it really needs we found it needs a discussion with different groups, and what works for one group might not work for another. How people access information is different for various groups. So what we found most effective is almost at a pilot level, if you like, is working with different population groups to really understand what the local and bespoke barriers are, what the motivational triggers are, what the opportunities are. And then once we've got that localized intervention down pat, we can assess, is it working? And then how can we either scale that or can we give it to other event teams, not just in Australia, but around the world, and say, here's the concept, here's the learnings in a box, like a Parkrun event is, and you can apply that in your local area. But we're only really still dipping our toe in that. We introduced an outreach, what we call an outreach ambassador program, just prior to COVID, which essentially are volunteers who do community engagement. It's been very stop-start because of COVID over the past couple of years. But all 20 of those around the country are working on specific interventions with one population group centered around one Parkrun event. And there, over the next 6 months, those projects will start to be implemented, and that will give us, a lot more learnings in terms of the way that we can have a conversation with different groups.
And often, I guess, we need to partner with other organisations that may be familiar with working with these groups. And I know Parkrun do a lot of partnership work, don't you, around engaging different various community organisations.
Yeah, I should have said at the top of that answer that yes, all of these are collaborations with support groups and networks who work directly with these groups.
Yep. Lorinda, is this something I'm going to throw you onto the spot with a question for myself here, because you talked about starting your own Parkrun, which is just inspiring after the journey you've been on. When you're starting up a new Parkrun, do you think about how to engage various populations? Can you just, for those of us who have never really started a Parkrun, can you share a bit of insights from that process?
Yeah, sure. So fortunately for us, we were in a community that already knew about Parkrun. So there was already a culture of Parkrun in Ballarat, which we're very fortunate of. But we're in a new suburb of Ballarat, so there's a lot of people that we needed to reach out to there. So our way of reaching them is that we found there was a local little newsletter, so we promoted it through that, went to community events that were on and said, look, Parkrun's coming, and promoted it through that. And then most of it has been word of mouth, I suppose, in the local community, bringing people along. A lot of people use the track that we use as well. So talking to people as they run past, or while we're out there measuring courses or doing things, that was chatting to the locals about what we were starting and what Parkrun is and how they could help. And in doing that, we've got a lot of new regulars at Parkrun that never attend and still haven't attended the other Ballarat Parkrun. They've only ever come to Wallaby Track. Could be because we've got the coolest name of Parkrun in Australia. But other than that, it's just word of mouth and getting people there, I suppose.
Oh, I think we might get some comments on the best name of Parkrun. So I think you started something there. Before we've had a couple of questions on volunteering, so I'm just going to give the panel a heads up that I'm going to move to volunteering aspects of Parkrun shortly. But one of the questions I wanted to raise was, let's just move from my screen, and I had it all ready. We've had a couple of questions, and it links to partnerships. We've had a couple of questions around the role of health professionals in recommending and endorsing Parkrun as a management strategy for chronic conditions, or referring people directly from a healthcare setting to Parkrun. Has there been any research conducted on this? And also, has there been any influence around parents' behaviour on whether we can engage children? So obviously Parkrun is very family focused. So do we have examples where kids have been linked with behavioural professionals to build on the initial motivation to change? So there's a health referral, GP referral question in there around, is there evidence around GP referral, what that looks like? And then also, has there been much research on children and families participating in Parkrun? So who wants to tackle the health professional one first, please?
Do you want me to provide some context to this before we throw it open, Lindsay? Is that helpful?
That would be really helpful. Thank you, Glenn.
So in an absolute nutshell, we became aware as an organisation, probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years more perhaps, that in the big parkrun countries especially, so the UK, Ireland, Australia, the health professionals across the board were signposting people to Parkrun for a whole range of different reasons. For social connections, being outside, motivation to leave the house on a Saturday morning, some walking, some getting confidence through volunteering, a whole range of different physical and psychological reasons. And over time, that led to the creation of what we call the Parkrun Practice Initiative, which exists in the UK and Ireland at the moment. And essentially that encourages and resources GP surgeries to create a relationship with their local parkrun event or junior parkrun event. So it makes it easy to have a conversation with patients about parkrun and increase the understanding of health practitioners about how people can benefit from parkrun. In Australia, we surveyed, just before the pandemic, we surveyed 3,000 primary healthcare professionals from across the country. And found that something like 67% had some experience of referring people to Parkrun, which was quite astonishing. And that's laid the groundwork for us to introduce a similar initiative at some point, hopefully later this year, when the pandemic starts to ease, which will link up initially GP practices with their local Parkrun, but across allied health, who knows where it will lead in the future. But it'll be a big a game changer for us in terms of being able to have a conversation with GPs, not just who are parkrunners themselves, but also across the sector. In terms of the children element and the evidence, it is still very, very embryonic at this stage. Anecdotally, yes, we've had feedback from GPs and other health professionals who have referred kids and their families to Parkrun. We are looking at ways to be able to get a much better idea of, if a GP says, here's information on Parkrun, here's how you get involved, to be able to trace actually if they are going along, how they're going along, how they're benefiting, that kind of thing. So that's going to be a much, much longer piece of work. But obviously to assess how successful the initiative is, we need to find a way to do that. But yeah, it'll be down the track.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. That's really important context. And for those who are interested in looking at research related to health professionals, I know Joe Fleming in the UK has published some research on this. So maybe check out some of those papers. In terms of children's participation in Parkrun as well, there are published studies around the world that have looked at junior Parkrun, because obviously in some countries there was junior Parkrun delivered. The Sprinter Research Group at the University of Sydney did conduct a pilot evaluation with junior Parkrun in Australia a couple of years ago. So I'm sure the team can speak to that if people are more interested offline. Just a couple of questions that I can personally answer. So we've had a comment around, was there any research around overweight and obesity, whether that was a barrier to some, so whether people with they're obese experience bigger barriers. That actually wasn't something within the survey that we specifically looked at, but just from knowledge around physical activity and the literature, I would imagine that once again they are a priority population that we would look to engage. Glenn, a specific Parkrun question for you is, what is a voluntary leadership role compared to a volunteer role? So this just kicks off shifting the conversation a little bit to volunteers.
Yeah, so in this context, we looked at our volunteer ambassador network around Australia, our event directors and run directors. But as we started to move through other voluntary roles as well, it's always been clear that there are predominantly women and girls in Australia filling those roles compared to males.
Interesting. And I guess, has there been much research looking at the profile of volunteers? So I think everyone on the call so far has really talked about the value that volunteers bring to Parkrun. Glen, once again, can I just ask you to maybe touch on the value of volunteering within Parkrun? And then Kat, maybe you could jump in and just talk about volunteering research, please.
Yes, we've done some research into this in the past. We're actually about to kick off something that's Australia specific. So yeah, again, just watch this space in this one, but it is first and foremost in our minds at the moment.
Yeah, I guess something that we haven't really done much in, but we've always talked about doing a lot, looking at the benefits for volunteers. Something that we haven't yet done, but would be very interested to look at, because it seems people love volunteering for Parkrun and other sports as well, and it would just be great to understand what benefits people get from actually volunteering. So I don't think that's very well understood in the space at the moment.
And I know from a research perspective with Parkrun, that's certainly one of the priorities with the Global Research Board. There's a lot of data that comes through volunteers. And Lorinda, you talked about, you actually started off participating and then went on to volunteering. Some people do it the other way around. Some people see volunteering as an entry point to Parkrun. Could you maybe share a bit of reflection on your volunteering story with Parkrun, please?
Yeah, so I started volunteering because I thought I should give back, because Parkrun had given so much to me. But then once you start volunteering, you just, I don't know, it's the relationships you build in a volunteer team, the people you get to meet. My a good story is my 12-year-old daughter, she'll get up on a Saturday morning to volunteer over getting up to actually do Parkrun. So she'll ask me every Friday night, Mum, are we running or volunteering tomorrow? And if it's a running, it's a bit of a groan, but she'll still get up. But volunteering, she jumps out of bed and she wants to get there and encourage everybody. And I reckon she's better at talking to everybody than I am. And I reckon her run briefing when she was run director at our volunteer takeover was much better than mine. But yeah, she's good.
That's amazing. And often in the broader sport research literature, we have seen, the benefits of volunteering in terms of employability and confidence and connecting with people. So being able to stand up in front of a crowd and public speak when you're a child is certainly something that I know I probably couldn't do. So that's just phenomenal skills that are much broader benefits to volunteering than just being involved in this
and
activity.
Another thing I'll just add is putting in, like I've got a 17-year-old son who, like most teenage boys, doesn't want to do much in the world unless it's revolved around him, but he loves media and filming and photography. So whenever we can, we get him to come and take photos at Parkrun, or he makes little promotional videos with us as well, so we can engage him to be part of a broader thing rather than just his world as well. So it's hooking people in different ways and finding what they love to do.
Oh, definitely. It's not one size fits all. Just on the notion of volunteering, and I guess to expand that a little more into leadership roles within Parkrun, we've had a question about diversity and inclusion within the leadership roles in Parkrun. So Glen, I'm looking to you for this one. Is Parkrun Australia doing work to encourage all kinds of diversity in core teams, so that all kinds of participants see themselves represented in various Parkrun leadership roles? Could I ask you to just expand on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our public facing communications generally, we try and showcase the widest range we can of people, whether it comes to cultural, for ages, body shapes, this kind of thing. And that's been, I think, incredibly powerful in the way that we've taken the message of Parkrun beyond your more traditional, I guess, running circles. In terms of the way that core teams are created, I guess a core team generally will be a microcosm of that community. And so what we generally see with new events is that you have a lot of different stakeholders who are involved. So in the activation process, a core team needs to go and get permission. They need to, as Lorinda will well know, permission for a course, design the course, do the risk assessment, find funding through public channels locally. And then generally just through that, you'll also engage a whole range of different local organisations, networks, support groups, that kind of thing. And so suddenly you've got people from all corners of the community coming out. So I think you've got those people there on the ground. The next step really is to give those people a little bit of a profile, if you like. So in the photos that Lorinda's son might do, or videos at the event, when they go on social media, when they go in local newspapers, when they're talking on local radio, when you're doing presentations to local authorities, this kind of thing. it's a really good chance to put people front and center, and say everybody in the community is welcome at this event. And with Parkrun, nobody owns Parkrun. It's for everybody in society, so everybody in the community has access to it whenever they want. And so, yeah, I think inherent in all of that is the idea that everybody can come along, and that if we can showcase, the range of people who come along and the range of ways they get involved at a local level, then everybody can see somebody who they can relate to.
Definitely. And other strategies, I guess, that Parkrun implement to really encourage ongoing volunteering is things like your milestone t-shirts and those 25 milestone marks and upward from there. And we've had a comment saying that someone's found that those milestones have actually really helped increase regular attendance at the event. So that's really positive to hear. But I guess for any other sports or people delivering volunteering opportunities, that recognition and explicit recognition of what volunteering means, I guess, is really been useful for Parkrun, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think where the shirts are so effective is that, first of all, it gives you a sense of identity. So you don't need to be fast, and you can take part however you like to earn the shirts. And the fact that we can say, look, we don't celebrate how fast you are. It's not about performance, it's about regular participation. And so I think coming along regularly, getting involved in different ways is really important. And the fact now that you've got, so volunteering shirts start at 25, 50, 100 through to 500, and the same for running and walking. So it's on a level playing field. And again, it comes back to participation being walking, running, or volunteering.
Any other final comments on volunteering from the panel at all? For those in Australia, you'll be seeing that this is a national priority for sport. So those of you based in Australia who are interested in volunteering through sport, I would suggest you keep an eye out for that national landscape. Glenn, sorry, you looked like you were going to say something else. Something else to add?
No, all good, thank you.
Okay, we've had a question around how the research findings will be used. And I guess I can kick this off, and then Kat, if there's something else you want to jump into. So one of the benefits of having the Global Research Board sit alongside Parkrun is that it is global, and we have representatives that sit on the Global Research Board from all around the world, hence being called global. The results of this particular study, so people were surveyed across Ireland, Australia, and the UK. So the findings of this research is definitely going to be used to inform Parkrun generally, more broadly, but there'll also be specific communication strategies that happen within countries. I can't talk too much about those because it might depend on the country, but certainly keep an eye out on your Parkrun channels for some of that broader communication. From a research perspective, we try our best to do webinars like this and share at conferences and things, and I'm sure Kat will work together to continue sharing this research. If there's, I believe that's most of the questions answered. I apologize if you've submitted a question and we didn't get a chance to it. I'm just going to look to the panel to see if there's any closing remarks that they would like to make before I start wrapping up the session. So Glenn, any final thoughts or comments from yourself?
Do you want me to scroll through here and see if there are any questions unanswered that I can quickly look to, Lindsay, or is that hijacking your job?
No, go for it. You're more than welcome. One thing I would say is just a shout out to Christine for thank you for sharing the volunteering benefits more broadly. That's a great resource to share.
I saw a quick question I can answer quickly before we wrap up. Someone asked, are females more likely to register in Parkrun? Something about 55%. And that's actually correct. Females, of all registrants, 56% are females. So females are more likely to engage in Parkrun, but then they're also more likely to not attend once they register. So Parkrun does a really good job of engaging with females. It's just trying to work out how we actually keep them there would be the next thing.
Great, thanks, Kat. Any burning questions you want to answer, Glenn?
Yeah, there was just one about, is work being done to understand why Parkrun Australia has seen a gender flip in participation since the restart? Yeah, we kind of preempted this. So we did regular surveys and insight all the way through the pandemic at local levels. So where events were open, where they were about to open, and where they were going to be closed for a longer period of time. And so we kind of already knew that there was going to be a downturn in female participation. And that's really informed a lot of the strategies and communication that we've worked on since events have reopened. and also, as I said earlier, a major project we've got coming a little bit later this year. So yeah, we're hoping that we can restore that balance sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Lorinda, would you like to make any final comments?
I'm all good. Just thanks for having me and letting me share my story.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Lorinda. Well, I think with the last few minutes, I'll start to wrap up. As Kat mentioned, much of the discussion today is focused on the latest research around barriers to parkrun. We have put a link to that paper if you'd like to spend some time reading that research. That link is in the chat, so feel free to access that paper. I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking all the wonderful speakers we've had today. So that's Glen Turner from Parkrun Australia, that's Dr. Kat Owen from Sprinter Research Group at the University of Sydney, and also Lorinda for sharing your story and being so brave. So thank you so much. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Bridget Foley, who's behind the scenes provided all the technical and all the team support for us to make this webinar happen. I'd also like to thank the Global Research Board for enabling us to deliver the first International Australia Research Series. So thank you so much for the AWRC for hosting us. The next research seminar that will be coming will be hosted in May, and we'll also focus on volunteering in Parkrun. So we've had a great discussion touching on some of that volunteering work. The next seminar will happen in May, and again, you can go onto the Global Research Board website to see the dates and the details for that. A huge thank you to you all for joining me here today. I personally look forward to continuing the conversation and continuing to talk about Parkrun more broadly and the research associated with it. So with that, we're actually going to close a few minutes early, and thank you everyone, and goodbye from us.